Would you like pizza?
Not right now.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. This is a special meeting of the City of Oneonta Common Council for the purpose of discussing the 2022 budget. Terry, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Herzig,
Here.
Councilmember Murphy,
Here.
Councilmember Davies, Councilmember Cruiser,
Here.
Councilmember LaFarge, here, Councilmember Carson,
Here.
Councilmember Harrington,
Here.
Councilmember Rafford,
Here.
Councilmember John.
Here. Please rise. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. And, before we will call to order. A few brief words about the process today before I turn it over to Greg and Jim and Joe. I will share with you that I have been losing a little sleep over this budget, and I have no doubt that both Greg and Jimmy have as well. And nothing I say is any criticism of the work that Jimmy and Greg have done on this, because I know they have worked tirelessly to try to get this budget down to an affordable place. And it's been very difficult, and a lot of work has been done since we met a week ago. I appreciate them doing that. So just to recap, I think it was a week ago today, we saw a preliminary budget that I think it was 1.2 million roughly. Is that about, Jenny, what it was? Of deficit spending using the unrestricted our unrestricted fund balance. And in addition to that, there was no money budgeted for capital projects. Capital projects are often streets repair, sidewalk repair, water main repairs, infrastructure, that kind of thing. Airport, we're always doing an airport project, and we, even though it's grants, we have to make up a matching. But yeah, we haven't had to the last year or two with COVID. They waived the local match, but that won't be the case going forward, unless something new comes down our way, which would be great. But since then, I met with Greg and Jimmy yesterday, and they told me that they've done a lot of work, and I believe that they cut that deficit to about half, which great work, well done, and much appreciated. I know that was hard to do, but it is still about $600,000 that would be proposed spending out of our fund balance, and that is without even putting any money towards capital projects. And usually we put a couple $100,000 or whatever it may be a year towards our capital projects. So it is still a highly unusual budget in the last 6 years. We have had a budget that did not spend any of our reserves, I should say reserves, but any of our fund balance, unrestricted fund balance, and was able to put a significant amount of money towards capital projects. So it's still a bit unusual. Jenny has also done, and Greg together have done a great job in putting together a list of potential sources of new revenue, which Jenny's going to go over with you. It's a great list, and that comes in conjunction with the list that the Finance Committee has been putting together to potential sources of new revenue. Both are good lists, both are valuable, both may produce some real results, but there's no guarantee. we're banking on, any money we spend this year that is, that's taken from our fund balance, we're banking on hopefully, having a bunch of $1 million in new revenue next year. Without that, it would mean making some very, very difficult cuts next year. It's always harder to cut back than it is to save in the first place. And on top of that, we'd have to come up money for our capital projects, which we're not funding at all this year. So what really makes me worried is all of our plans that we've been putting together for the future. Lettuce Highway, we've got to come up with, if we get that grant, if we're lucky enough to get the grant, we have to come up with what, $1.5 million, is it, roughly? About $1.5 million in our local match, if we're going to do Lettuce Highway. West Street, we still have to come up with $2 million for that. We want to replace the water main on River Street. I don't know how much that is, $1 million or so. About more like 2. We're looking to do a water treatment plant complete rebuild like we did this year with the wastewater treatment plant. That certainly needs it. And that would come, I assume, out of the water fund, but still money that would have to borrow. I don't know how many millions that would be. And we just had a call with the FAA today. Len was on that call along with Greg and I. And, I was taking a look at the FAA has a schedule of capital project grants for us over the next few years, and the next 3 or so years, we're scheduled to meet $500,000 in matching funds for our airport projects. And 100,000 of that is scheduled for 2022 for moving the AWAS, which is not budgeted for this year.
So we were awarded from New York State DOT $900,000.
Right.
The AWAS will be paid in full. There's no match on that.
Okay. The chart that
They
that
gave
they
you
showed us today showed it was $1 million project, $900,000 grant, $100,000 city match. If that's not correct, right? The so we got about 500,000 coming down the pipe over the next few years. So I don't know what's driving the budget up so much this year, so much higher than it ever has before. I haven't honestly really dug into every line. I have to take a look. I'll leave that to council to do. Jenny will probably give us some information on that today, but I just ask that everybody does their homework on that, takes a hard look. And make sure that, I just worry about spending for today. And then the great plans we got for the future. If we go ahead and borrow these millions and millions and millions of dollars, that's going to be debt payments that we're going to have to make in the coming years. And that's going to make it even harder to balance our budget in the future years when we start getting all of this debt payment. So I am losing a little sleep over it, and I just want to share that with you. It's been said that the hardest and most important responsibility of the council in the year is passing the budget. And I can tell you, in past councils, I've seen council members cry over having to pick what to cut. I think council members get angry that they're even put in the position of having to do that. So I just want to share with you my concerns over it and ask you to look at it. With that, Greg?
Actually, I think I'm going to pass it right to Jenny. The mayor did a nice introduction. As you know, we're going to continue reviewing the general fund tonight. We made some additional adjustments. So we'll go over those. And the water, sewer, and enterprise, or 18 funds. So for the region.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Greg. What we're going to do first is we're going to update on the general fund from our last week's meeting.
And I handed out everybody new packets, and they should be in order for how we're going to go through our presentation tonight. And so what I would like to do is update you on the general fund. So if you could go to that packet, go to page 1. You will see a summary of the expenditure types. And well, first, the first slide. Right, the expenditure types, you will see that we updated this to revised preliminary. And it will show you that instead of the budget changing by 1.4, it is now down to 1,054,000. And we decreased, as the mayor said, the unrestricted fund balance from the almost 1.2 million down to 669,000. And this just shows you the expenditure type and the change from the 2021 budget. I would just like to highlight on something that the mayor said. One reason why this budget is particularly hard to fund is it's compounded by 2020 and 2021. If we remember correctly, we had to put in $1 million last year to balance the budget because of COVID. And this year, we have made up that $1 million. Matter of fact, we've gone up to 1.4. But so not only did we have to fund $1 million from last year's budget, but now we're looking for it to fund this year's increases. So it's compounded by the 2 years. We're a little bit behind because of COVID on the revenues that we generated last year. It's just a compound. But as the mayor said, we have an action plan that we would like to propose to you. On page 2 of the general fund, what we did is we showed you the preliminary budget that we went over last Tuesday to the revised preliminary budget to show you where we made cuts. So you will see that we took out one position in the personnel services, and that reduced it by 41,000. We took out a number of pieces of equipment, which reduced it by 290. And then the department heads went through and they we asked them to cut 10% wherever they could with being able to still provide services. And they went through every line, and this is a result of them going through their different line items. So we were able to reduce from last week's budget by $444,000. Yes.
Is it possible for us to get a list of what those, like you included last week, you had a list of what those cuts were so that we can see what, so I guess what sacrifices were made?
Sure, absolutely. Cool. Yep. And then
Is that working?
So, Jim, real quick. I'm looking at page 1.
mhm.
I'm looking at the 2022 revised preliminary budget of 6.7 for personnel services.
Mhm.
But when I go to page 2,
Should say 6.7.
so either this, where did the 6.8 come from then?
6.8 was the number last week. That was the preliminary budget last Tuesday. This is the revised preliminary budget.
Sorry, another question. Basically, so the reason why I asked for that first piece and what I'm asking now is so that I can keep up, because I was going through the budget. I mean, the like nuts and bolts that you gave us, and I think being able to see what had been cut from that and where those line items are would be really helpful. I don't know like the best method for that, but I just know for me, like to be able to, because I know equipment was a big question for me, and like knowing where those cuts came from in this budget that you gave us would be really helpful. Is there an updated version of this preliminary?
I
budget?
don't have it prepared for tonight, but I can prepare and email it to you.
Okay,
That's
because then I
okay.
could just check for the changes.
Yeah, and
that would be
I
fine.
can easily summarize it for you also for just quickly, just so you're informed now, the equipment pieces that we cut out between this week and last week. We reduced the police vehicles from 2 cars to 1. We took out the sign machine, which was $50,000. We took out the extrication equipment, which was $65,000.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
We took out the extrication, if I'm saying the word correctly,
Okay,
extrication equipment from the fire department for $65,000.
gotcha.
We also took out the hot box trailer from DPW for $45,000.
Okay,
And then we just took a small work order software out for $29,17.
cool.
Those are the equipment items that we took out. Okay, and just so you know, on the personal services, the one position that was taken out last week, we had an administrative sergeant. We've taken that position out, but want to modify it by promoting a current police officer to a sergeant position, and so that way we would have 6 sergeants and 17 police officers.
Okay, and then would a police officer position become vacant?
Not in this particular budget, no.
Okay,
In this case, we would promote police officer to sergeant, not that position. So it has the same total number of officers plus sergeants. There's only one more sergeant.
can I
Chief
just,
Whitaker has identified that as a priority. Worry about that, so please.
Yeah, so we're pretty short on administrative staff, so this would be an administrative position that would be assisting us with discovery reforms, with maintenance and upkeep of the vehicles, electronics, and other specifically police-related items that we have in the cars, radar units, data master, to be able to backfill and do evidence runs, etc. The big portion of this is if I have an administrative sergeant with the promotion of a lieutenant, which is likely going to come from the ranks of sergeant. That frees up 2 additional positions, which puts fresh sergeants out on the street. The sergeants that are currently working have been working short-staffed for over 2 years. And they really could use an influx, and the officers that will be filling those positions are experienced and highly qualified officers that would be capable of doing much more than just a rookie police officer out of the academy. So it makes sense to be able to put the seasoned officers into those positions of leadership to infuse the department with a little bit more esprit de corps, and so improve morale a little bit, I think.
okay, thank you.
Jenny? So as you are going to detail a little bit more what the cuts were that were made, if you could provide just a little bit of narrative around those cuts, we've eliminated this because of this, just a few words so that we, as we're looking at it, have a sense of what we want to kind of revisit.
Sure. So, and the slide that you're seeing right now is just a repeat from last week. This is the major revenue sources within the general fund. We didn't make any changes. And I just want to point out that right now the proposed taxes has a 2% tax levy increase. It does not go all the way up to the full tax cap, which would allow, if you went up to the 3.1%, it would allow about another $56,000 in revenues there. But everything else has stayed the same. And one thing that I will be asking the council to consider is, as I spoke about last week, is raising the ambulance fee revenues. We are not at the state average for the ALS. We are for the BLS. We're right on for BLS, but our ALS 1 and our ALS 2 is not. We're about $200 below what the average is. And as I told you, even though it sounds like we're charging $1,800 for an ambulance ride, we're actually only getting paid for about $420 of that bill. So by raising it just by the $200, we'll raise that up about $40 a payment. So we'll go from an average of $420 a payment to $460, which should generate about $80,000 more in revenue. So that will be a request that I'll be making for the council to consider.
Also user fee, so.
So that was just based on charges, not volume.
It's volume. We need to maintain the 2,200 average. Right now, the last time I looked at the ambulance calls, we are very close to the 2019 level activity. And so I feel confident, because it's gone back up this year, that it will go back to the normal activity of pre-COVID.
So 2017, 18, and 19, the ambulance volume is trending in what?
About 2,200 per year, that's about the average.
And that's what you feel we're gonna do in 21?
Yeah, because I see the activity returning, we're only within like 15 calls of the 2019 activities. Chief, I don't know if you have a different opinion on that.
No.
And what I base the 420 versus 460 on is from our multi-med billing service. They give us the data on what they consider closed calls. And that is the accounts that have been fully collected upon. Okay, so the next area that we would like to highlight is the type of revenues and the type of expenditures. But first, I would like to update you on the screen. Sorry, on the screen, we have the use of fund balances. We're showing you what we presented last week from the preliminary to the revised preliminary. So we went from general fund balance of 1.186 million to 669,000. So that was a reduction of 516,000 from the unrestricted reserves. And then we shifted what we were going to use the reserves from. We took out the hot box trailer for DPW and substituted the bucket truck since that was the highest priority for the DPW staff. And that is the change of the 72,500 there. That is just a summary of how we shifted the funding for the different pieces of equipment. Yep, and then this is the detail, and it shows you which reserves that we are going to use. So the screen shows a summary, but in the detail on page 3. I'm sorry, we're going to stay with the screens for a minute. I apologize if I'm a little clumsy. Just so you know, we just finished putting this together about 10 minutes to 6. So, the expenditures for 2021 to 2022, we just want to show you where the change is between budgets and between service areas. And this just provides you general government support. The reason that number looks large is, as I told you last week, I had to increase the contingency that we normally put in the budget. And that is to prepare for our debt payment that we're going to have on our NYPA, our NYSEG streetlights project. That's almost complete. And then the next screen will show you the major expenditures.
Can we go back?
Oh, sure.
Then
Go
I
ahead.
think that was a 1.1 something, right, investment.
Yes,
So the payment that you were just referring to,
yes.
is that one time or are we spreading this out?
No, this is going to be spread out. We haven't determined the terms of this yet with EFC or with NYPA. What I've been told is we could pay it all in full if we wanted right from the get-go, or we could spread it out depending on what term we would want. We haven't finalized that because I don't have the final numbers in front of me yet. They haven't given me the updated project costs or what the final numbers are going to be. And we still have the smart cities portion of the project to complete. So this is just in preparation of that. Just so you know, the amount of our electricity utility bills has gone down drastically because of this project. So this project is going to well pay for itself within a short period of time. Instead of paying NYSEG the utility bills right now, we're going to end up paying them for the actual project. But it's going to be well worth it for the city because this is going to reduce our electricity costs for years to come.
So do you think we're going to be on track to match that debt by savings in 10 years? Because I think that was the original schedule.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes.
So I guess I didn't follow you, Jenny, what you were getting at with the debt services then. Did you budget high on the 756.9 or?
No, the debt service, I'm not allowed to put in
Put that in there.
a debt service until it's real debt.
So that's what you're acknowledging.
Right, that's why it's in contingency. Any other questions on that screen? Major expenses, this breaks it out between the type of expenses, and it shows you between personnel and fringe benefits, equipment, supplies and services, and I have a little bit more detail for you that in upcoming slide.
Well, the savings in personnel services attributed to personnel itself, or
Taking that one position out, because we took the one sergeant position out, or really one police officer position, that affects the salaries, health insurance, retirement, FICA, all of the fringe benefit categories. Okay, and then items removed from the request. You will see that in the top portion of this slide, that was from the preliminary budget of last week. We had removed over 3.2 million from the total request. And then tonight on the revised preliminary, we are now up to 3.6 million. So the equipment went from 1.8 up to 2.1, wage and fringe benefits from 788 to 889, and all other categories from 526 to 652. Now, also in your handout, on page 4, we show you again how we're going to utilize the fund balance categories. And then on page 5 is basically just a summary of the slides that we just went over between the expenditures and the revenue portions. But what is not going to be on the slide is on page 6. And the reason being is because this is just a little, it was a little bit too much information to put on the slide. So in the revised preliminary budget, the expenditure types for personal services and fringe benefits, the 1.04, you will see that I've broken it out for you on where the categories changed. So on personal services, I broke it out between what I call units, depending on where the employee works. The fringe benefits, you will see that almost all of the cost is from health insurance. And then supplies and services, I broke it out for you to show you where these numbers come from.
Is this just public safety?
No, this is citywide.
Okay. Gotcha. I guess I was just confused by where it says, oh, I see, these are the changes in this first personal service category.
Correct, yep.
Gotcha. Okay, because I was like, no way, everyone's salary is only $20,000.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, cool.
Okay,
Thanks.
you're welcome.
So Jenny, what would, in supplies and services, materials and supplies seem such a broad category, can you?
One of the biggest things for the 94,000 is they want, we put an extra $30,000 in for salt just because of the timing of the orders. So that is one of the biggest chunks for the materials and supplies. And I'm not thinking right off the top of my head what makes up the other 64,000, but I can get that for you.
So Mark, when you look at a category of materials and supplies, that is a broad category across the department, materials and supplies, the police department or OPT or buying.
Much different than the clerical need.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, very broad materials and supplies.
Jenny, under fringe benefits, the health insurance, that is representative going from what, 19%, which you originally were thinking, down to 7.1.
No, the 193 is a result of the 7.1% increase. That's the change in the budget for the general fund.
From 21 to.
I have a specific question with regard to the health insurance. Sorry, Meg. It goes from in the big preliminary budget that you gave us. The health and dental insurance and the municipal executive goes from $750 in 2019 to $11,000.
The reason being is because in the preliminary budget or the 2021 budget, our previous city manager did not have health insurance, but our current city administrator does.
Gotcha, okay, that's a very reasonable, thank you. It was just, when I saw it, I was like, well,
Yeah.
especially because, typically, well, yeah.
And just so you know, when we budget health insurance, we're basing it on our October health insurance bill. So say, for example, a single person who has single coverage in October, say in April gets married, that health insurance budget then has to totally change. So ideally, it would be great if we had the funds where we could budget everybody at a family plan, but that would be extraordinarily expensive. So what we do is we base it on October, and then we go with the changes throughout the year.
Yeah, I was presuming that our previous city manager did have insurance, and so I was like, what changed there? But not having it to having it still.
And also, if you go to other departments and you may see a large jump, it's because maybe somebody went from single to family coverage or something like that. And as the mayor said, I have lost sleep. I have been awake since 1:30 this morning, just so you know. It's just like the mayor, I'm sure, has been awake since 1:30 this morning. Because this is a challenging time. It's not sustainable to use fund balance to balance your budget. We said it last week, we'll say it again, and we have to come up with an action plan. And we have done so for tentatively, not saying that it is the only thing that we can do, but as of right now, this is what we would like to share with the council. Revenue sources, one thing that we would like to do is monitor the sales tax revenues. As you know, 2021, the sales tax revenues have greatly increased. I am not privy to all the information, but I know part of it is for online sales. I don't know how much is reflected because of inflation. I also don't know how much is reflected because of the stimulus that has been sent.
Just for clarification, Jenny, it's fairly recently that municipalities were able to take in tax from online sales?
Yes, that started in 2020.
Okay.
Yes, it was in late 2020 that
Okay.
we started getting it. So I want to monitor, I want to see if it's going to be consistent. Will we be able to raise our budget up to 5.1 million? So, is it going to be a trend? And so we need to study that. Second thing is that I've already mentioned is I would like to increase the ambulance fees. This not only will stay competitive with the state average, but it will also generate solid revenue for us. We want to study the possibility of new ambulance service agreements. The fire chief has told us that he has a lot of ideas that he would like to explore, and we would like to have time to be able to explore those ideas and see if it produces real revenue. We also want to look at paid parking. In researching paid parking, I tried to go to the city of Albany, and then I ended up going to the city of Ithaca. The city of Ithaca generates $3 million a year on paid parking. The village of Cooperstown generates $600,000 of paid parking. So we have a lot of potential source here in Oneonta, but as we talked about last week, we would like to develop a reserve on the sale of the Deet Street parking lot to start our parking district project. That will take study and it will take planning and it will take a lot of strategy and understanding, but it's something that we think right now it's an untouched revenue source for the city of Oneonta. And in the paid parking, it could be on street parking, it could be leasing spaces in the parking garage, in the parking lots. We just have a lot of possibilities to explore. We also want to, yes.
Would that include underneath the parking, would that include like snow tows and stuff too?
No, those are actual fines. That's a different category. Right, this budget does not include any snow towing. We had stopped snow towing. And just so you know, how we used to bill for it is that we would bill for the total bill plus, I believe it was plus $50 for the city. It wasn't a moneymaker for us, and it was a tremendous amount of work for DPW, and I also think it was a tremendous amount of work for the police department. But again, that is something that we can explore. We also want to research the possibility of sales tax revenue from cannabis sales. In researching this, the state's projection is from a little over, on the low side, they're expecting $250 million worth of sales tax. On the high side, they're expecting about $678 million of sales tax. The mayor very detailed explained it to me as far as how that sales tax will be distributed based on where distribution centers are approved by the state. But so the sales tax is double-edged, and Mayor, please correct me if I do not repeat it correctly. There's the normal sales tax, which if there's sales in Otsego County will get a portion of that, and we'll get a portion of that. But if there's distribution centers within the city, then we get 3%, but that will only be if the state approves a distribution center in the city of Wilmington. So there's possibilities there. We have no definites, but again, it's an area that we want to explore and study. We also want to, I also want to get in contact with the state to see what their plans are as far as adjusting our state revenue sharing formula. We have received the same $2 million, $2.1 million from the state for over the past 10 years, if not longer. Now, when they get this influx of this new revenues, are they planning on changing the formula for their sharing with municipalities? That's something that I would like to investigate. The next thing is we want to research our gross utility tax as a result of the NYSEG settlement to see if that is going to bring in any additional revenues for us. That won't be a big ticket item, but it's something that we want to follow up on. I also have I'm in touch with a company that's going to audit our franchise fee agreements with the cable companies to see if we are getting our full allocation. So that is something else that may generate some ongoing revenues for us. We also want to maximize departmental income fees. One of Greg's goals that he told me is he wants to meet with each department head to make sure that we are charging properly and that we are maximizing our revenue sources to the fullest, either by reaching out, advertising, making sure that we have a cost analysis, what it costs us to do whatever we're charging for versus the fee that we're charging for. We also want to, Greg brought this up, which I think is a brilliant idea. We want to research developing a stormwater district. What a stormwater district does, and Greg, if you want to expand on this, but I'll just say it briefly, is what it does is it looks at the frontage of your property, and it will look at your curb, your sidewalk, your street. Am I saying that right?
Actually, in this case, City of Ithaca has done this, and it's been in place for 6 or 7 years now, I believe, without being challenged, despite having some question about legality every year. So, essentially, looking at the amount of impervious surface coverage on a particular parcel, and there will be a formula to determine what the equivalent residential unit is. And basically, long story short, you're charging a fee for maintaining a stormwater system, similar to how we do that with water pump and sewer pump. So we have stormwater pump. So based on the amount of impervious surface coverage, you can get a parcel that's completely covered in asphalt, a higher rate than someone that has more impervious surface. So obviously that runoff is going somewhere to be handled by the city stormwater system or something. It's just a way to capture the cost of having that stormwater system, and that includes not just the pipes in the ground, but the curbs and that sort of thing. And it also distributes it more equitably. So this is a fee, just like water and sewer. There are no tax exempt properties. So might be something that is beneficial, especially for taxable properties. So we're going to spend on it because we'd like to study it, see how it was done. Something.
So folks with parking lots, they're more going to be affected than a residence.
Yeah, they would pay their fair share based on the higher because they have a higher percentage.
And your square footage of your house would be considered compliant.
Not to get too detailed, but there's for administrative. So with administrative, there's a single family, 2 family, 3 family houses, and charges. And then once you get bigger than that, there's a form. Otherwise, it would be burdensome. And the cost would be too great to try to manage that.
So Greg, did I hear you correctly that this is a fee that we can charge across the board on any parcel within the city of Elyria? Doesn't matter who the ownership is. That's how it's done.
This is a common thing in
Right,
other
and what-
states, other cities, New York State's a little different, and if it was experimental, I guess, or would say in this regard, so.
And just to piggyback on what Len was just saying, just for clarity's sake, so independent of anybody's affiliation, it's not for profit or whatever, if they're a property owner.
And what is good about this is that this would reduce the tax levy on the parcels that are already taxed, but then we would be able to raise this fee and distribute it to every parcel within the city. But you've heard Greg and I mention Ithaca a few times in this meeting. What we plan on doing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but we've talked about actually going to Ithaca, meet with their administrator, their manager, or their CEO, and just educate ourselves on what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that we think will give us a really good jump start on what we could do here. And of course, all of these sources that we've talked about, it's going to take work and time. But I'm very optimistic that some of them will work. Maybe not all of them, but I think they're all worth exploring and they're all worth pursuing. And I also think that in time, we will make up that gap that we're realizing right now. But at the same time, we want to look at decreasing expenditures in our action plan. And in doing that, we want to develop a comprehensive fleet study and a long-term replacement plan. As you can tell, the equipment is extremely expensive. And being able to replace all the equipment at the pace we have been replacing it the past couple of years is just no longer sustainable, because it takes too big a hit on our reserves. And we want to come up with a plan of how many pieces of equipment we're going to replace each year and at which dollar value. And if we can value those, get a plan and say, okay, these 5 are this year because it's going to total this amount and so on. We want to come up with a comprehensive plan of doing that. We also want to study the use of the Allison building, also known as the Armory. We want to know, do we winterize it? Do we shut it down? Do we not heat it in the winter? How much rental income are we getting in the winter? Is it covering the cost of, keeping the building operating and things like that? So we want to have a study. And Greg, a study for that building, is that going on?
Yeah, the city got a CDBG grant, it was $48,000 that we would need to assessment and a building conditions assessment of the Armory, so that would feed into this, looking at what other potential uses, can we potentially sell it or find ways to better utilize it, increase the revenue so that it's cost effective or it's cost control.
We also want to explore possible shared service agreements with the other municipalities. We have several ideas. We don't want to bring them forward right now because we want to see if they're feasible even before we start to talk about them. But that is also on our list. We also want to study each department's operational procedures to see if every department is operating at a cost that we can, one, afford, and also cost that is the most effective and efficient. And we also want to explore reducing our health insurance costs. As you see, the health insurance bill in the general fund is $3 million between actives and retirees. That's a big ticket item. We want to explore just to see what other options might be there for us. And then, as with all funds, increased population. The reason I listed this is because we've got the lofts on Dietz going in, we have the apartments on Springbrook. That's going to bring in more people as residents, which means it's going to raise our water and sewer revenues. It's going to raise traffic on Main Street. It's going to raise sales tax. It's going to just bring in more activity within the city. So these are all positive and very exciting things to think about as far as the future of Oneonta. We also, through all of our efforts through the DRI and our Survive and Thrive and our different marketing plans that we're doing, we're going to try to increase tourism. And one of the things that we would like to look at, as we were just talking about the Finance Committee, is having a pools grant for different events and things like that, just to promote getting people into Oneonta. And which segues right into the last is to increase economic development. the private partnerships that we're exploring for the Market Street, where does that expand to? Will it be successful? Will we get at least one person? Will the Deeds on Loft trigger more development around Deeds on Loft, or lofts on Deeds? I always say it backwards, I apologize. So we just have all of those options. As you know, our grants department is extremely busy, and, we're constantly looking. Our airport development is extremely busy. Are we going to get economic development at the airport? One thing I would like to suggest is when the airport master plan is presented to the council, I think we should ask about the economic development portion of the airport master plan. What's the plans of development up there? How is it going to benefit us? So this is our action plan for 2022. So we're asking you really for some time. As I said, neither Greg nor I or the mayor are happy about having to balance the fund balance with our unrestricted fund balance. But fortunately, as I've said before, we've got a strong fund balance that is getting us through the crisis. So not only are we making up for the 2020 shortfall, we are now having to move that forward. And how I want to demonstrate that to you, if you go to your last page of the general fund presentation, I went back to 2015 and I broke out the service areas of the budget. And I showed between general government, smart, public safety, health, transportation, and so on down the line of where our budgets were from 15 to 2022. And you will see, and then I took the difference from 2015. So you'll see general government support is 137, public safety is 1.5 million, health is 7,000, transportation 180, and so on across the line. And you will see that all the way over to the right on the total page, I also showed you the change between year to year. So, so now into the 2021 and 2022, that is where we're now starting to fall into having to create the better revenue sources. Within, yes.
I'm sorry, so I'm obviously still very new to this, and so if my questions are silly, please let me know. It's obvious here that the biggest change from 2015 is in public safety, it's almost $1.6 million. Also, that is equivalent to the total change. My question is, what contributes to that substantial increase over time?
I don't have the detail with me tonight, but I can get it for you. But you have to remember that the equipment in public safety is very expensive. So,
Gotcha.
but also, they also have a majority of our employees. They're a bigger crew than the other areas within the city. So payroll and fringe benefits, as the chart showed last week, I believe we broke out on the pie chart. And so I can go back and analyze the 2015 categories for public safety versus the 2022, and I can give you a report on that.
That would be great, just because, I know that it's a big department and it's a big important department, I totally understand that. I guess my question is based on, because of the change, right? Not the percentage that it takes up, but the change between 2015 and 2022. So I think that report would be really helpful. And also, this is just for my own, saying it out loud, is, they're in the strategy to better sort of float our budget going forward. It seems like there are definitely things that we can do to balance that, but I would be interested in what we can do to, I'm interested in Chief Knapp's ideas to be able to share services and things like that. I know you guys do a lot of heavy lifting, and it would be interesting to know how other municipalities can be supporting our fire department and the work that you do, because I know that a lot of it has to do with overtime is a very expensive category for you guys. But anyway, so I'm interested to see what changes we can do to make that more sustainable as well.
Yeah. And I will say, as you all know, I've been with the city for a very long time. When I was hired, we had about 135 full-time employees, and we worked on that average for many years. And as the mayor explained, when Dick Miller was mayor, they started to not fill vacancies to bring the costs down. We got down to maybe 127, 128 full-time. And we have realized since then that it's extremely hard to provide the services at that level. And so positions have started to creep back up, not out of luxury, but in my opinion, out of necessity.
Sure.
And the public safety, because they do have, as I said, a larger number of the staff within the city, their numbers are going to appear higher.
Gotcha.
But I can break it out for you
Yeah,
between.
numbers would be so helpful. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah.
So at the same time on the expenditure part, I also did it with the revenue types. So you will see from the real property tax, the real property tax items, and so you know what real property tax items are, it's our mortgage tax, our those type of items that are taxed from other sources. Non-property tax, that's basically where your sales tax falls in. Departmental income and going across the board. So when you look at the total column, you'll see that the expenses have gone up 1.6 million, but our revenues for our subtotal of revenues outside of our fund balance has only gone up 970. The appropriated reserves of the 365,000, that's all for one-time purchases of different equipment or capital projects. The appropriated fund balance, as the mayor said, back years ago, it was routine that the budget was balanced with fund balance. That's what that 338,000 is. The other ones, the 73, the 130, the 330, those were all one-time purchases, and that's what fund balance is to be used for. It's not to be used for repeated operating costs such as payroll, fringe benefits, materials and supplies. It's usually for a piece of equipment or some type of improvement that you're not going to have year after year. So, so that just gives you a little bit of history, which I thought was very useful. Any questions?
I think you had mentioned a month or two ago when you brought it up, maybe specifically finance, about the water and sewer. And I thought November was the month that you and Graber
We have
presentation.
We have that plan for November.
So will that change any, will that be an increase in revenue stream for that?
Well, we're going to get to the water and sewer one, so can we answer that question during that presentation?
This is I guess a broader question. I know everybody's worked really hard on putting this together. Will the agency that rates our fund balance, will they still consider us in good shape?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We are financially strong. We are one of the strongest municipalities in New York State.
Jenny, right now, we're looking at taking $1 million, a little over $1 million out of our reserves.
If you go to page 4, it's 669,000. Oh, the highway equipment should not be there. I'm so sorry. Just cross that right off. The use of fund balance is 669,000. That's of our unrestricted fund balance, and then the reserves are for the different pieces of equipment that we set those funds aside for those purposes.
Right, it's, since we keep hearing it and it kind of something that's way back in the back of my mind, and I keep asking, what's gonna be our plan to put money back as we use it?
Well-
Then we can develop a plan,
Well,
besides the revenue sources and stuff like that, have we figured out
as
if that doesn't pay off, how are we gonna start thinking about putting some money back?
Well, as I presented last week, I would like the council to consider adding I think it was 757,000 into reserves, because we will have a surplus this year. And that is how we do it. When we analyze, when we have savings throughout the year, that's why you never over budget your revenues, knock on wood. And you always are conservative on your revenue numbers. And then you're always also conservative on your expenditure numbers, because you don't want to be cut short on either side. So right now, the sales tax is budgeted at $4,850,000. I'm actually expecting it to come in higher, but I'm not willing to budget that, because I don't think it would be fair for me to say I've got enough evidence that I feel comfortable with this number, because I don't. But does my gut tell me it's going to come over more? Yeah, it does. Only because of the trend that we've been seeing.
Can I ask a question on the paperwork they gave us last time? Right, over the week, I tried to look it up. And this, I think, is with regard to the general fund. Yes, it is. On page 6 of the document that you gave us last week, which I think includes the agenda on the front. Yeah. Am I correct in understanding that the 2021 projections versus the 2021 budget, did we overspend by $875,000?
No, that's our projected savings.
Oh, that's wonderful news.
Yes.
Okay, so I misunderstood that. Great, thank you.
Yeah. Our adjusted budget is 17,400,000. Our projections is 16,500,000.
So will that, to Scott's point, is that what's going to be put back?
Yes, it's a
Right.
combination of the excess in revenues and a combination of the excess savings and expenditures.
Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome. So Scott, that is the approach that has always been. Now, you can actually tax for reserves if you want to. The city has never done that. And usually it's only $100,000 to $200,000 because, as you know, a 1% tax increase only raises $49,000. So for us to tax to increase our reserves, the tax would sound very large, you know, if we were to do that.
Yeah, I wasn't hitting towards that at all.
Yeah. So, so
Can I just ask a super new question? If we saved $875,000 last year or this year, can or why not, can any of that portion of that money be put toward the things that we would be using the reserves for?
well, not exactly, because
Okay.
what happens is that when we close the financials, all the expenses and all the revenues get closed to what we refer to as our fund balances. That money doesn't stay in cash, because it's not like we.
It's not liquid.
It's not like we can just go to this particular pocketbook and take the money out. It all gets closed back to the fund balance.
Okay.
And then we reappropriate it through the adoption of this budget,
Gotcha. Okay.
okay?
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. And so we're still going to need, after that, we'll still need to take out $661,000 from our.
Correct, on the estimates, yes.
Yeah.
Now, say for example, and as you saw in the report that I provided you last week, most of that savings and expenditures was because of vacancies.
Right.
And say we have vacancies again, and at the end of the year, because vacancies, you know, most of our, it's almost 70% of our budget is salaries and fringe benefits. So if you have a vacancy, especially with the more, higher paid positions, that money adds up very quickly. Also in the budget, whenever we have vacancies, we always budget for a family plan and health insurance. If a person gets hired and they are a single plan, that's automatically thousands of dollars of savings because it's about 25,000 versus 10,000. If they do the buyout, then it's even more savings. So it just depends on the scenario of how the personnel works out versus the fringe benefits.
Do we budget for wage increases?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, cool. That's right.
Jenny, you mentioned vacancies, and I haven't thought about this before, but in my experience, not here in the city, was always budgeting for vacancies. Do we budget a vacancy rate?
Yes, we do.
10% or whatever? they
Yeah,
do?
we budget for the approved positions that we currently have. And then if we're going to fund additional positions, we make that clear to the council.
But I mean, do we, the approved positions, do we budget that for
Yes.
100%?
100%. Yeah, now we did not, the only time we did not do that, Mayor, was in 2020.
Why don't we? There's always vacancies. In my experience, past experience for an organization I've been at, was we always budgeted for a vacancy rate, whether it was 5%, 10% based on, because you're never going to have all positions filled.
The reason we don't do that, Mayor, the reason that I don't like to reduce the budget, assuming that we're going to have a vacancy, is because then you have to, if that vacancy gets filled next year, then the following year, not only do you have to fund the full year of that vacancy, then you also have to fund the portion that you didn't fund the year before. So it's almost like, say it was a half year, then you have to fund 150% the following year.
So it's
So,
reasonably safe to assume that whether it's 1% or 5% or 10%, it's never going to be 100%. So it's always safe to assume that there's some percent are going to be vacant. So if we're budgeting at 100%, we know we're over budgeting.
well, I don't look at it as over budgeting. I look at it as that we're fully budgeting the approved positions. Because I would not want to go from one budget year to the next and then have to say, okay, for example, police officers, right? We've had trouble with, so if we were to take out 3 police officers in the budget because they were vacant, or only budget them for a half a year, then the next year I would have to budget 3 full vacancies plus 1.5 equivalents because we didn't budget it the year before. It would be too big of a jump going from year to year. It'd be too expensive. So I would much prefer to show you the full staff budget. And if we have savings, then it just goes back into our fund balance.
Right, I think as you explained before, Scott's question, that typically goes back into a reserve or fund balance.
Right.
That's kind of that source of.
So another question, just to follow up with personnel. You mentioned we're at just shy of 70%. We're shy of just 70% for personal services. And Greg just mentioned that, I can't remember if it was finance or one before, that we're taking a look because we know that we're short staffed in a lot of departments, which means we're gonna be adding on potentially more staff. So that means that personnel service line is gonna jump. And and as of right now, with 70%, we're getting towards almost unsustainable with our 2% increase or 2% or.
Well, let me.
Can I finish real quick?
Yeah, let me put your mind at rest for a minute. Just so you know, in the original request where we had the 3.7 million deficit, in those numbers were 8 personnel requests. Because we wanted the council to know what the department heads' requests were. And almost all of those positions outside of funding temporarily 3 firefighter positions are out of the budget now. We cannot in any way increase the personnel at that pace within 1 year. It's just too expensive. So as Greg said, he needs to look at each department. We need to come up with a plan of how many positions that we will be able to add in future years. We need to pace it out. We cannot do 8 positions in 1 year. It's even difficult for us to do 3 positions in 1 year. And it's also difficult. We made a cut in 2020 to fund only 2 positions for a half year. So now in this budget, we have to make that up because now that those positions will be full year. So that's what I'm talking about as far as pacing and budgeting at the full dollar amount. So we cannot just, don't make the assumption that we're going to add the number of staff members that have been requested all at once, because we just could not be able to afford to do that.
Right, but what I was getting at was, with our staff that we have now, we know with the way salaries have increased, and inflation has gone up, that our salaries now are going to be lower than in the private sector. So we're going to have to be raising and looking at raising our salaries up, which is going to be adding on to that personal service line. So have we looked at how are we going to do that so that we're on pace, so that we don't lose qualified people?
That's what we do during contract negotiations. And Katie, jump in if I say anything. But what we do in contract negotiations is we look at the cost over the contract period. And one thing that I will do when I'm looking at it is when I calculate the numbers, I will say, this is equivalent to a 1% tax increase or a 2% tax increase. And so we look at the cost of the entire contract. So we know right now, with all the contracts in place, what the salary is going to be for the number of years until the contract is renegotiated. So we already have that all planned out.
I'd like to jump in too, Scott, I think, I see what you're saying with, if we think we need to increase salaries to be competitive and recruit, and retain positions better than we're able to now. You know, we have a gap to make up just to break even the way we are now. That first before we even talk about increasing salaries, but it'd be the same type of analysis looking at stormwater fee or increased sales tax trends, whatever those revenue sources or cost savings might be. That's how we get to a point where hopefully we're able to, more competitively. But
I may not be asking what I really want to ask. I may not be getting it out, but the thing of it, I guess my thing is how are we looking to the future? I guess the best way of saying is how are we looking to the future to start building 5 years down the road of a budget, knowing that we're gonna have to raise all this to get there, besides just what little bit we're doing here now, because what little bit we're doing now is not gonna offset 5 years down the road when we're talking about contracts coming up and knowing that private sector salaries are just gonna outpace us so fast. You know, I guess my thing is that's just something that we can think about and work on in the next couple of years coming up so that we're not gonna be so far behind that all of a sudden we have to go and say, hey, we're going over the tax cap to have to pay for this.
absolutely. I mean, like I said, I think looking at different revenue sources that we're maybe not taking, or solely taking advantage of them, looking how we can save costs through efficiencies, or is the only way outside of tax revenue increases, or water and sewer rate fee increases, or fair increases. It's the only way we're going to get. We are looking at what we what we'd like to pay. Wish list, I guess, but at this point we just can't afford it. So that would be secondary for balancing the budget. Yeah, that's definitely the back.
And all of those things, when we do long-term planning, and one of the things we have to do for our bond council is do a 5-year projection to see where our fund balance is going to be. So all of that is analyzed, Scott, and we use those numbers in theories going forward. But for example, remember, some years you may see like one of the units may go down because a veteran employee retired. So that high salary came out of the salary and then the beginning salary came in. So there's always transfers. This year we spent a lot on equipment, but this year, the next year, the equipment request is going to be a lot smaller. Or, you know, and that's what we ask the department heads. Is your request going to be the same next year at the same level, or is it something out of the ordinary this time? For example, you're going to see it in the sewer fund when we go to the sewer fund. Last year we had 175,000 in it to clean the digester, I think it was. That no longer is in the budget because that project was done, so that came down. So it's like a rotation of where the money gets spent.
On insurance, just a point of clarity, I see that our active personnel, it's an increase of 7.2. Around here, but is it 7.1 or 7.2? And then what is our non-active increase?
The non-active, are you looking at today's document?
I'm looking at the general page 1. This is 6.6 for the non-active.
Okay, the 6.6 and the 7.2, first of all, the non-active is for our retirees' health insurance. That is just the change between one budget year to the other. Even though our rate went up 7.1%, our mixture might have changed. So we could have had somebody go from a dual plan to a single plan, or we could have had it going in the opposite direction. We could have had in our retirees, we could have unfortunately lost some people or whatever. So it's just a combination of changes.
So that's just an overall look, the 6.6, because I thought their insurance, it was 2 point something.
There's a mixture. We have 65 plus retirees, but we also have people that are younger than 65 and they're on the Excel.
So they're on 7.2.
Can I ask another simple question? How, we're going to be capital projects, right?
Nothing that is already funded. In some ways, as far as, for instance, the Plum Creek project, which has already been funded, is going to be happening. West Street already funded, won't happen. But we're not opening new projects.
Just the
Other
chips.
than, which, yeah, so,
Yeah.
when she says chips, it's a state funding source. So it's not a city. River Street.
So for our street projects, just so you know, as just Greg mentioned, we have our CHIPS funding, but we also have that turning 740,000 that we received that we're hoping to be going to be able to put that towards the West Street project.
That's the
And
ARPA.
like, not the ARPA, no, no,
Okay,
this was a separate award from the state.
Oh,
And that is why in our ARPA presentation last week, we want to take the second half of our ARPA and put it towards water and sewer infrastructure projects. And one of the biggest reasons is because right now, our budgets do not have any capital projects.
right.
And as you know, from the past couple of years, we have told you that within our water and sewer funds, we have millions of dollars worth of repairs that need to be done. And that's why we're looking at our rate increases to get prepared to be able to do those. So when the mayor mentioned all of the water projects that we're going to have to bond for, that's why we're looking at the rate structures, and that's why we want to use the ARPA funds in 2022 towards those water and sewer projects. That will benefit the city taxpayer tremendously because they will not be paying interest on those monies. So, but we want to talk about ARPA at the November 9th meeting, I believe it is. But, so we can hold that discussion.
Yeah, I guess my question is just that if capital projects do come up, where would that funding be drawn from? Is that too like mysterious?
Well, I think it would depend on the situation. Is there a grant involved? Does the grant require a match? So it's a multifaceted,
That's what I was afraid of.
a multifaceted question.
Typically, it comes from the same pot as everything else.
So it would be, I mean, but we don't have, our revenues don't cover those things right now, so we're talking about spending reserves if something like that were to come up as well, right? Okay. Just checking.
And just so you know, the mayor mentioned the airport grants, right? And the local match. In the past, I want to say past 5 years, every time a local match has come from, had been required for the airport, it has come from fund balance. Because, or unless we had savings elsewhere in the budget. But that's just been normal practice for any of those type of capital projects.
Maybe now's a good time to just talk about that. We did have that meeting today, we looked at the airport capital improvement plan for 2022. There are 2 projects currently identified. One, which would require a $3,500 city local match that is currently not budgeted. And that's the design for on-airport obstruction removal. And then there's another project that would relocate the AWAS, which is the automated weather observations.
Weather observance for station.
So that, I believe, I wanted to check with Turner, this is what you said before, but I wasn't sure if that.
And we were ready at 900,000. When it was explaining to me, we were awarded 900,000. That covers the cost.
We'll research it. The chart that they presented today said that it was a $1 million project with a $900,000 grant, $100,000 city fund. But we'll research it. It would be great if it is. But we do it if it is required 100,000. Where's that come from? It's not much.
Right, so making sure everyone understands that right now that $103,500 is not in the budget, we have to come from fund balance.
Quite often airport grants are 90%, with,
Well, usually the FAA grants, the city pays 5%. It's the state grants, so we pay 10%.
yes.
The AWAS is a state grant. I'm just gonna throw out a question, it's really for council. But, if I know what the answer is, but you put it out there, if we're going to be, not be able to reduce the, expenses down to the point where we're not spending fund balance. One of the options to reduce the amount we're fund balance we're spending is to, do the tax increase up to 3.2 or whatever the allowable is this year. Since we are talking about ways of charging people more money to increase revenue, whether it's through fees or whatever, how does the council feel about reducing the amount that comes out of fund balance by having a 3 point whatever % tax increase?
What would the additional 1.2% look like?
I'm sorry,
What would an additional 1.2, because it's budgeted at 2%.
it's another about $56,000. If we were to go to the full tax cap, it's, right now, it's in the budget at 97,000. And if we go to the full tax cap, it'd be 153,000. But remember that from last week's presentation, when I showed you the cash flow and how it compounds year after year? So, and just over a 3-year period, because we didn't go with the full tax cap, we lost out on over $650,000 in cash flow. So I just want you to consider that for whatever you decide you want to do as a levy, that opportunity is gone from that moment forward. So, and
But I think what you're saying, Jimmy, is that any increase this year is an increase every year. So it's not just $50,000, that's the amount.
Right.
It's $50,000
every year, correct?
While we're talking about this, because I had a question, can you share off the top of your head? You had mentioned that the budget as presented is a 2%, and you said the cap is 3.1%. Do you know off the top of your head what the dollar amount per 100,000? Did you already say that?
I presented that last
You were in
week.
the room.
Oh,
Sorry,
It's okay.
It's 56,000 total. If you go through.
difference, yep, but the
That she wants to know the
the cost of
Oh, I see, I
it,
see.
yeah. Hold on. So I didn't miss that?
Oh,
Yes,
because I misunderstood what you were asking.
Okay, so
yes, right.
So right now, at the 2%, it's not a little over $97,000. So that will be 19.67 per 100,000.
Okay.
Okay, if we go up to the cap, it will be $31.04.
Okay. So it's $20 to $30 per 100,000. Okay, thank you.
And that was in your last week's, it's on page 2 of your last week's.
Oh, that's right.
Okay.
Yep, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
See, taxes are a catch-22 too, because as you're sitting there talking about raising taxes and stuff, well, people are already can't afford houses, now we're gonna add on even more expense, and then rents are gonna go up even more, we can't. Because that gets passed on from the landlord to the tenant, and so I mean, that's where it becomes hard. Is to know where's a good spot to stop to, the.
We haven't been discussed water and sewer yet.
Yes.
And we're looking to increase that
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, so maybe like a 3%, then we could be raising up, I think it was from last year, I think you wanted to do slow and steady, I think 5% is or 10% is off the top of my head, so that's, even more that goes on to the cost of living into the city of Oneonta.
And what I'll do is between now and next week, I'll put together a packet to show you exactly what it would be going through, because I don't want you to think if we go 3% on taxes and then 10% on water and 10% on sewer, it's not a 23% increase. It doesn't work out that way. It's dollars, and I can put that together just like I did last year for you.
I think, I'm sorry, I just wanted to jump in to follow up too. I think I heard yesterday or today that the average home value in Oneonta is like $175,000. And so, I mean, we're really talking about $45 or $50 per year for that to go up. So I hear what you're saying, Scott, and I think that all these mitigation procedures and the plans to get revenues, other revenue sources and things are so critical. But I just don't want to like feed into hype that it's really a huge difference that's gonna tax people out of our city.
Well, I guess I'll sit over here and disagree, because as a former landlord, I can tell you, every time things were passed here, I had no choice but to pass it on to the renter
Right.
to be able to afford not only just what the city wants, but then I also have the city that comes after when you're talking about having to do inspections, there's inspection fees, and then I have to pay another company to come in and sign off on a HVAC system, another one's got to come in and do electrical, then we got to fix it all, and you turn around and you're trying to maintain a decent living spot for people. So there's only one other thing, if you're gonna try to even break even for that house that you're renting out, you have no choice but to pass that back down.
Totally, but the tax burden
So-
changing by $50 isn't gonna.
Well,
They got-
it actually, Katie, interestingly enough, if the current average price of the house is $175,000, that's a lot higher than it was 2 years ago. It might have been $125,000 2 years ago, because we're on a bubble here. If that is the case, our equalization rate will change, so that people will be paying the same amount. A 2% increase, a 1% increase should always remain the same. If the cost of houses are going up, if that shouldn't increase the amount of your tax increase. If it did, the city would be getting a whole lot more money.
Right.
If every house now is worth 20% more, the city would get 20% more taxes. We don't get any change. What happens is the equalization rate changes so that a $175,000 house will be taxed the same thing as it was, what it was worth 2 years ago, $125,000. So it won't be $50 instead of $20. It'll stay what it was. I know that's confusing, but every year we have a new equalization rate. And if there's inflation and the price of houses go up, our equalization rate changes so that your tax stays the same, even though your house is going up because of inflation.
And also, just so the council's aware, the city's equalization rate for the past number of years now, since our revale has been 100%.
It's 100%, but it's probably not going to stay that, given the way that,
I'm not gonna what it does.
well, I mean, the way the values are going up, it can't stay.
Mayor, you were saying, you were wondering what the sense of the council might be relative to 3.1, 3.2, or 2%, or whatever it might be. Do we want to kind of do the straw poll of that?
Well, if you want to hit your,
Oh, there you go.
yeah, one of our decisions is.
Ginny's way out of it,
As you,
as I should expect.
Tax levy increase changes on November 2nd. We lay the tentative budget.
Yep.
We do not vote on it until the November 16th. But November 2nd, next week, next Tuesday, we'll be laying the tentative. If there's any changes that you know of that you would like us to incorporate, I would love it if you would share that information. If not, we'll be presenting this revised preliminary to you on the 2nd. Second decision is tax levy increase. Do you want me to incorporate a larger? Do you want me to stay at the 2%? So that's one of our questions for you tonight.
so Jenny, if we wanted to stay at 2%, we'd be looking at knocking about $60,000 out.
It's about 56,000.
But Jenny, what's included in these numbers tonight is 2%.
It's what's included in these numbers tonight is 2%.
So you would be opting to increase it.
Yeah, so if you increased it to the tax cap, our fund balance then would go down by the 56,000.
But as Greg said, what we're looking at here is a 2%.
Yes, correct. I'm sorry if I misunderstood you.
No, it's my bad.
But that, well, keep in mind that, and I'm not advocating one way or another, but keep in mind that $60,000 will be increased revenue, not only this year,
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, forever. I mean, once you levy that, unless for some reason you take the levy backwards, which did happen one year.
So in 10 years, that's $600,000.
And also, to put in perspective, if the tax bill is to go up $50 a year, it's about $4 a month. So,
Gary, first of all, I apologize, but I'm gonna have to leave, but one thing I did want to point out is in all the years I've been on council, I don't think we've ever gone to the tax cap. And you would know.
no, we've never gone to the full,
Right,
before the tax cap was instituted, there were years where we would have 3-4%.
yeah, but
tax.
I'm talking about
Yeah.
since I've been on.
Yeah, but since the tax cap has been instituted by the state,
Right.
we have always stayed under the tax cap.
I don't normally advocate going to the tax cap, but I never advocate for going over it. But I think we're in unprecedented times with our expenses and projects that have to be done. And I think we should at least consider it. I'm also thinking very positive about what's going to happen in the near future, hopefully with an increase in population with the projects we have going on now. I'd say if we don't go to the tax cap this year and we go $600,000 in the general fund, I wouldn't advocate for doing that ever again, because it's just not sustainable. But I'm not necessarily advocating for this, but I'm willing to go to the tax cap this year. In all the years I've been on the council, this seems to be the biggest year that with the most amount of issues that are in front of us. With one of the biggest deficits that after we've taken the preliminary budget and sent it back and had it come back to us, it's still this massive hole, where in the past, we've always been able to whittle it down, so it's more of a divot than a crater, and we still have a crater to it.
And as I shared with you last week, just between 19, 20, and 21, what we did not levy was 291,000. And over that 3-year period, we lost out on 656,000 in cash. So that's how it compounds over the years. So when money is left on the table, it has a lasting effect. And as Joe pointed out last week at the meeting, the state is already trying to protect the resident by having the tax cap regulation, and so are all of you. And so it's there for the protection of the resident.
And to highlight that, I think, the example 291,000, so our tax levy this year would be 291,000 higher, so all things else the same. The use of our fund balance this year would be reduced effectively, had it been levied, had it to the 3 years, just those 3 years to the cap. Our fund balance usage this year would be $291,000 less. Furthermore, if you look at what happened last year, so it would have been about $200,000 higher last year, right? So when you look at, either if we had a surplus, that would have been 200,000 higher. So now your fund balance, assuming it's not reserved, your fund balance is increased now by $200,000, which makes the years when you have to use it a little easier. Or if there was a deficit, it would be reduced by that much more. Unless, of course, those things would have been used to purchase other equipment, which would, of course, balance out now when we're looking at cuts. We're looking now at 2 years where we're pushing equipment purchases back. So those monies, had they been in place, they're either increasing our fund balance, increasing our reserves, providing other equipment, which is, now being pushed for at least the second year, most likely. So the continued impact of not levying to the cap is pretty significant in those respects. It would look, our situation today would look a lot different had that been levied.
I think, I think Dave covered most of what I wanted to say. Kind of going back to what Councilmember Drennan said, I would be in favor of going up to the cap. As you said, Ginny, if our predictions are true and we are anticipating this level of growth, we can always go back and lower the cap. It's been done not 5 years ago, was it a couple of years ago?
Yeah, one year the tax levy was decreased by $100,000.
Right.
And I would never suggest doing that, but I would suggest maybe holding steady if you didn't need an increase. The only reason is because to make up for that decrease takes a very long time.
Sure.
Because remember, 1% on our current levy is only $49,000.
Right.
So that would take you almost 3 years to make up for going backwards just by that one adjustment.
Right, so I guess another way of saying it is, if we really do see the growth, we wouldn't necessarily have to raise the cap. Maybe not necessarily get rid of it, we could, as you recommended,
Right.
kind of keep it level.
Right.
You know, I feel like a broken record saying how unprecedented this year has been these past 2 years. I would imagine had previous councils known the world they would have been living in if 3 years ago, I don't necessarily know if we would be having this discussion. I think, and that's not obviously to blame any previous council, this was unprecedented, unpredictable. I think we have to adapt, and I would be in favor of raising it this year.
Yeah, and trust me, the previous people that served in not only the elected officials, but in every position in the city, always had the city's best interest at heart. And they made the decisions at that time based on the information they had at that time.
Right.
And it's a very difficult balancing act to fund the services and also to be able to pay for all the services and provide all the services at the same time. It's a very difficult balancing act. And I am sure that all the previous decisions that were made were based on solid information at that time.
Oh, absolutely, I agree.
Jen, can I ask one more question about the tax cap?
Sure.
And I promise I'll keep my mouth closed. If we didn't go to the tax cap this year, would the tax cap go up next year?
What happens is you have a rollover, and it only rolls over for 1 year. So in your example that I gave you last year, that it shows the formula. So if you don't go to the tax cap this year, that difference will roll over till the next year, and you'll have one more opportunity for that, for the tax cap. But the tax cap also, if you don't do it that next year, then it gets dropped. So it will roll from year to year because the formula carries it forward, but it only carries it forward once. So what we don't levy this year will carry forward 1 year, and then the formula gets updated for the next year after that.
So it still have the opportunity to 3% next year?
No, I
No,
can't
because it's
guarantee
gonna
that.
drop.
I can't guarantee that. It's gonna depend on the load factor and the tax rate factor that the state assigns.
Okay. I remember you were saying something was wacky with the formula. I can't remember what it was.
Also, our pilots will affect it. So if we have the new pilot in effect for the lofts on deeds, that will change what we're actually able to levy. 1 year, and I think this is what you're referring to, Luke, 1 year the levy went down by like $3,400. And that was because we got a large pilot agreement, which meant that our taxes, it's not only the levy, but it's also what we collect in our pilot. So those two gets added together because it's considered a tax source. So if we get a large pilot agreement, that will lower what we're able to tax the rest of the
Yeah, but
homeowners.
that's just because you're not lowering it, it's just you can't get a pilot and the tax.
Correct,
Property.
right.
So it's just,
Yeah,
so
both
you're just calling it the same thing, but you're calling it something different.
yeah,
You're
it's,
not lowering.
right. You're not lowering it goes into the tax levy itself. So your pilots go into the tax levy calculation. And if you increase the lot on your pilots, then it's going to reduce what you're allowed to raise your levy by.
Jenny, just in advancing this straw poll around, so for me, I'd like to see, I have a lot of confidence in where we're going to be in a year's time, 2 years time, certainly. So I'd like to see maybe split the difference between the cap and what you proposed here, maybe 2.5. And that way we do continue to have that open building. As I don't know, Luke, whether or not we ever really be able to roll back. So assuming that what we present winds up staying kind of in place, just that little bit more of a boost. It's what, $25 now to 100,000?
No, the difference is, oh, yeah, $25.
So which I think is a more palatable, jump. And still takes us to a place where, we're seeing more monies coming in than that 2%, and it continues to roll over and build upon itself. So for what it's worth, that's where I'm at.
And it would be a $5 or $6 increase over what is proposed in front of us now, and the full tax cap would be a
That's actually a little
$12
less than
increase.
$5. I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
Can we look at the other side of the sheet? Can you explain a little bit more your thoughts that you mentioned earlier about the annual compound effect on the expense side of it? If we're showing that effect from 21 into 22, you mentioned it when we were looking at page 1 of the general fund, that we had an annual compound effect. That's all we're feeling from COVID. How many more years do you think we're going to feel that negative compound effect?
Well, depending on our action plan for 2022, I can't answer that definitely at this moment in time. I would think it would depend on our action plan and what we're successful at in 2022 as far as new revenue sources. So, and as I said, if sales tax stays the same as it is this year, that may be tremendous. So there's too many ifs right now to answer that question.
You were looking at the expense side of this, so I was trying to understand your thought process. As you're looking at the expense side, what expenses are you looking at that are going to have a negative compound effect? That's what you were mentioning.
Well, what I was talking about on the negative compound effect, when I first started the presentation, I was talking about the revenue side of being able to fund the expenses that we've incurred. The expenses are moving forward, but the revenues are not. COVID slowed it down. Because we lost revenues in our interest, we lost revenues in our court fines, we lost revenues in our parking, we lost revenues in our recreation fees. And, all of those little numbers add up.
Right. Those little numbers added up, superseded the sales tax that you talked about, that pie has gotten much, much bigger.
Yeah.
So those little numbers superseded the big one.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that the little numbers, because they went backwards, didn't let that surplus be even larger. So if I had been able to budget recreation fees where they normally are, I was able to budget court fines where they normally were, or even our parking fines where they normally were, we would also not be looking at this amount of fund balance use.
So it's not really a negative compound effect on the expense side, it's just we have a revenue shortage.
The expenses are moving faster at this point in time than our revenues. And the reason being is because in 2020, COVID slowed everything down and compounded with the state law on court fines. We used to collect over 200,000 a year in court fines. Right now, we're not doing that. So it's a combination of things. It's not just one thing, but it's a combination of things. So what we need to do is re-gear ourselves and say, okay, how do we make up for currently the lost interest? I'm communicating with New York class on our interest rate. I got a message last week that the interest rates are going to start going back up, and she said she would get back to me to let me know. So am I encouraged that our interest earnings will be higher in 2022? Yes, but am I confident to put it in the budget right now? No, because I do not know what it's actually going to end up doing. I need to see a trend before I can predict that it's going to improve. So it's a combination of we need to re-gear to figure out how we can replace the revenues that we have currently lost, and then look at how we can reduce expenditures. That's why our action plan is multifaceted. If indeed none of those work out, if indeed we don't have the revenue increases that we want, or the savings in expenditures that we want, then Greg and I have actually talked about another action plan of how do we reduce expenses, but we're not ready to go there.
I have a question about the airport. Does it generate revenue for the city?
Correct me if I'm wrong, I got the numbers here, but believe in 2020, minus the taxes that we have to pay to two other municipalities, we were $5,400 use of taxpayer money in 2020.
Okay,
We
that's
pay about 32 or 35,000 in taxes to two municipalities. But short of that, yeah, in total, we were $5,400 of taxpayer
How does it generate revenue?
money. Rental fuel. And then this year, we were hit hard on fuel because we did the apron project, which was right in front of the point of sale. So we had that along with 9 inches of rain in July, which extended the project even longer. And then we kept the spoils. And we were 10 square feet over our allotted amount, 10 square feet. And the DEC shut us down for 2 more weeks for the spoils. And that's their, so we were shut down for 2 more weeks. So that massive delay, right in the height of when we sell most fuel in the summer, caused our fuel sales to be.
Otherwise, it would have been over what?
And then once we get the new fuel farm, which is completely paid for, there's no local contribution. We'll be able to buy our fuel at a lower cost because we're buying more volume. We have to pay a short load now because we can't get a whole truck. So then our profit margin, you can keep the prices the same, pretty expensive.
Well, did I hear you correctly? You said the 5,400 was a deficit, not a revenue.
No, it was a deficit. We used $5,400 with the taxpayers' money.
One thing that's also affected the airport fuel sales is the past 2 years, they haven't had the Baseball Hall of Fame induction ceremonies. That is one of our biggest weekends for fuel sales. And so the past 2 years, we haven't had that.
Thank you. I just realized that I didn't know the answer to that, so I appreciate you telling me.
Our occupancy is in hangar A, we have one, we just, we're like at 98% occupancy. I think we have one more hangar that we do.
Thanks.
So as far as continuing that strong hold, anybody else want to give their opinion?
I guess I'll go. I'm not ready to raise it up for the $53,000. I'd rather take it out of there's a 257 from the loss. I'd rather take the 53,000 up. And I don't want to sound like I'm politicizing this, but I really don't want to hurt our senior citizens that are on a fixed income. I mean, to me, that's who I keep thinking of. The $50 to us, because we're active, doesn't mean a lot, but to them, because I did ambulance work for so many years, I was inside their homes, they were making decisions whether they feed the cat, take medicine, or feed themselves. And I really don't want to do that to them. So those are the tough choices, but I mean, if we have the sale of the loss, I think it was 257, I'd rather use 53,000 from there than raise it up. It's more on us to figure out the revenue. That's why in finance, we had that special meeting for new revenue sources. We're still moving forward on that. Ginny and Greg are doing a good job. Also looking at revenue sources. So hopefully with 22 of us, we'll create some new revenue sources in 22. Those will be the tough choices. Look at what the Village of Cooperstown, the board went through to do paid parking. Yeah, Gary was talking about that earlier, and Ginny just mentioned $600,000 is a lot of money. The city of Winnebago would be happy, right, if we had $600,000 for paid parking. So.
You guys are looking at me. I don't want to use the word ambivalent because that sounds like I don't care, but I think it's more just that everybody raises really good points. Like you said, Jenny, previous councils were doing the best they could with what they had, and I think that's where we are too. Like nobody wants to raise taxes. Glenn, I think you raised a really good point. Like I don't necessarily have an extra $50 laying around, but spread over the cost of a year. I could probably manage it, but, you know, you mentioned a group of people that weren't on top of my mind, and now they are. I think I haven't had, I mean, I'm sure I'm not gonna come in with my red pen and, you know, find a ton of savings, but I just made it through the first third of the budget that you sent to us, so I don't know that I would be ready to say, yeah, there's absolutely nothing else, nowhere else we could get this money. I mean, I think the reality is we're talking about 2% versus 3.1%. So the bill is going to go up no matter what, at least, well, not at least $19, but $19 per 100,000. So the difference we're talking about is $12. So it's not nothing, but it's something. I think that, you know, it's on us to present quality of life to people if they feel as though their taxes are paying for services that they want. It's met with much nicer sentiment. You know, and we do have a lot of things working for us in the next few years. We have the Housing Commission to hopefully kind of mitigate some of those problems that you mentioned, Scott. We do have marketing to hopefully bring some more people in to the city. We have projects in the works, Lost on Deeds. You know, all those things are very positive. Sorry, I'm freezing from over here, like. I don't know, I'm saying all of this to say I don't know right now.
So Katie, it's not a binary choice of 2% or 3.1. We can land some.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
suggesting
I
right
mean-
in the middle, honestly.
Right, I guess. Right. Is that what we're discussing? Are we willing to raise it at all? Because, yeah, theoretically, you know, I mean, theoretically, I would be willing to go up to the tax cap in order to mitigate the loss, but I think Len raised a really good point, which is like, can we come up with that money some other way and putting it onto the taxpayer? I'd like to look into that before I make that decision. I don't want to fall deeper into a well, certainly. Well, it's a tricky question.
If it helps, we don't need a decision tonight. We'll lay the tentative budget with the 2%, if that's what everybody's comfortable with. You always have more time to think about it, and we can actually change it by the November 16th meeting if the majority decides that they want to raise it more than 2%.
Okay, and what's the process for that? I'm sorry. to-
You would just make an amendment to the tentative budget, is what you do. And go ahead, Luke.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were
That's
talking about
for
COVID.
the tax increase, that's for, if you said you were looking through the budget to identify cuts.
Mhm.
That would be the same opportunity to do that.
Okay,
Yeah, and just so you know, and I'm, you know, I don't want you to not do your due diligence by reviewing every line, but the department heads have been over their budgets line by line more than 3 times. Joe and I and Greg have been over each line over and over and over again. And basically what Greg's message was to the department heads is cut out whatever you don't need to maintain the current level of service that we have now. So we have to depend on their expertise to know. Unfortunately, just like for everybody else, the inflation factor hits us. You know, and where you'll see where utilities have gone up, or you know, vehicle fuel has gone up or whatever. We've tried to incorporate a reasonable estimate in the budget for that, and you know, things like that. So if you need more time to think about it and to you know, that is fine. But we are looking for guidance, and I will prepare the tentative for next week with the 2%, and if the majority votes to change it, we can do it then.
I know I promised I was gonna shut up, I guess I lied. Just one other thing, you touched on it was inflation, and I'm thinking of, you know, where gas is up over 40%, food at the grocery store, I mean, bacon's gone from $5 to $9. And, you know, I mean, everything's just out of control. I don't know what it's gonna be like in the next 6 months. As I listen to the news and stuff, they're carrying this out 6 months, 7 months, 8 months for a year. And inflation could possibly be, you know, on the rise, and they don't know about when they're gonna, it's not out of control, but I mean, it could very well get out of control quick, depending on the national level, what they're gonna do to try to help bring it down. I know it's gonna hit us, but I'm just thinking of, when I look at my budget and I'm sitting here looking at food, I mean, $200 for food used to bring in a lot, now $200 for food, I walk in maybe with a bag and a half of what I used to, you know. So when we are talking like $40, $50 extra or whatever, right now, that's a lot of money. So I coupon.
I just asked if you really go shopping.
I go to BJ's and I get yelled at. But, so I mean, that's just something else we gotta take in when we're looking at the budget is, when I say we're looking for the sweet spot is, how much do we think everybody can afford? You know, that's the hard part. That's where I'm struggling now. It's not that saying that you guys didn't do your job or whatever, and that's why I'm asking, like, what's our vision for 5 years, 6 years out to do things, is I'm just trying to make the best educated decision that I can make now for not just the city's prosperity, but also the residents that live here.
I understand, as I said, it's a balancing act.
It's a big weight. I mean, you guys say you don't sleep. I look up at the ceiling going, I don't know what, you know, it's hard.
So I keep hearing $40 and $50, and I'm trying to figure out where that's coming from. If it's 2% on $100,000 is basically what we're saying is our formula. So we're talking about $20 on $100,000. If we're talking about 2.5%, then we're talking about $25. So
I think it was the average housing right at 175.
Right.
Yeah.
Is the average.
I'm not sure. I think we got a couple of houses at the very high end that are skewing what the average is. Right. I don't know if we've got a lot of houses.
Yeah.
Could I just tie in what you were saying, Scott, to the tax levy formula? Is, so of the two factors that the state provides, one is the tax base growth factor, but the other is the allowable levy limit factor. And that is an inflation tied item,
Okay.
but it's limited to 2%. So when you talk about increased inflation, so say, just as an example, say there was 4% inflation, right? That's obviously a cost that's borne by our taxpayers, but it's also a cost that's borne by the city and the goods and services that we purchase and we buy. But we are limited within the formula at most to the 2%. So there are years when it could be less because if the inflation is 1% and it's 1% less. So I think again that I'm just wanting to tie in, like, so you're, I mean, in a real world scenario, you're right. Like it's, you know, there's a lot of costs that people are hit with, but the truth is we're hit with those same costs, and then we're already limited by the state in their inability to raise revenue, even though they clearly recognize that there's a cost factor related to inflation that allows within the formula to increase the tax base. So
Just a general question. God, please don't put this in the paper. I'm just a general question. What is the penalty if it went over the tax cap? Like, what if we
there's no
decide that
penalty. The
we
only thing,
just can't go at a 3% because of everything that's going on?
you could go at 10%. The only thing you need is a supermajority vote. So if we said we need a 10% tax levy. No, this is just common law. It's not. So if it were a 10% tax levy and our cap is 3.1 as it currently is, it would just require a supermajority vote of the council. So
Right, and just so you know, for the first couple of years when the tax cap was implemented, if every municipality within the county stayed under the tax cap, then the state actually gave a refund to each resident. But that was eliminated, I want to say, after maybe 3 years. So as far as the penalty, if the state were to still do that, then if someone did go over the tax cap, the homeowners would not get that small refund.
I just want to go on record as I'm not saying go with a tax cap. It was just a general question that I just was
Which is,
curious.
it was education.
And I just want to clarify too, that technically you're not voting on a tax cap, but you're voting on the budget, which
Right.
includes a tax levy amount that is related to the tax cap. So I just want to clarify that distinction too. But effectively, if you vote for the budget, you're voting for the tax cap that's within that budget.
The only 5 votes would say that could answer that question for you.
What's the next? Yeah, the ambulance fee increase, I would like to keep that estimated revenue increase in the tentative budget, if we have strong support for raising it up to the average. And what is the next one?
I'm good with keeping that and going up to the average.
All right,
I mean, the ambulance is the one thing that everybody,
okay.
even visitors would.
Right. And then as Greg said, right now, there is nothing in this particular budget for any contribution to the airport project. So we'll need to get clarification on that, and then the council will need to decide if indeed you want to increase the use of fund balance again by the $100,000 if we're going to approve that project. And are we 100% sure that it's going to happen in 2022?
It's on schedule, it doesn't.
Doesn't mean it has to happen.
Okay, all right. So, and just so you know, before. So just so you know, there'll be a process for that application. We'll have to get council approval to make the application, saying that they are willing to commit the funds to it. And then we will have to bring it back to council another time to execute the grant agreement. So you'll have more than one opportunity to say yes or no.
Just to clarify, the administrative started to talk about will be the meeting. That Chris would like to promote an existing officer to administrative sergeant. That difference is not currently in those numbers.
We normally in the personnel budgets, especially in the police and fire departments, we usually have a line for title changes. Knowing that people may get promoted during the year. Let me look, I believe there might already be some money allocated in the police department budget for title changes, but let me confirm that. And if it's not in there, we can tell you what we know.
Oh, sorry, you don't have to wait for me. I was just gonna look quick. Well, we have information on every single position that we budget for, so.
Yeah, we took that out.
Great, we're looking at that. So
Yeah, so that
the
would,
only personnel service that we did was the administrative sergeant, right? The 3 other firefighters are still in there.
Yeah, 3 firefighters to be hired in anticipation of future retirements. So as we not primarily increase the number of firefighters, but temporarily increase the number of firefighters.
Can I ask a very silly question? What is, and I see it in every department under everything, so it's definitely a thing, right? What is Zaltis?
that is our current phone system, and the company is just Zaltis, that's all.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the desk phone system.
Gotcha.
And it's the cloud-based system that we have now. AT&T is normally our cell phones, and Verizon is normally either our fax machines or our alarm systems.
Okay, and that's just based on their rates, right?
Yes.
Gotcha.
It's actually a budget.
I was like,
It
maybe
means,
this.
it means you're in deep trouble.
I wondered if it was just like a gibberish thing for like some miscellaneous departmental. Okay, that makes way more sense. Thank you.
What I did when I did the telephone budget, I just broke it out by vendor. That's how I did it.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
No, thank you.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, so that will conclude our discussion on the general fund.
That was just general fund.
That was just general.
You guys want a break? You guys have been sitting for a long
I was
time.
gonna say, we've got 3 pizzas over there, so I hoped more pizzas going to go. You guys want seconds? Do you want?
The pews are on.
Do it.
There is a microwave down in the,
Let's take a 5-minute break. Lou, let's take a 5-minute. Good suggestion.
Thank you.
Thursday.
Thursday's my busiest day.
muted. Yeah, this is short. No.
I don't see.
Should be good.
OPT was the very last one.
Oh, there it is.
It's thin.
That's a good thing.
Or was that the one on the bottom?
Okay.
Yeah, I just jumped. I don't know why I scared myself.
Was Paul asleep over there?
We just start whenever?
No, the mayor's got to see. Okay, am I allowed to start, Mayor? Okay. All right, so thank you for staying. I appreciate it. We're going to jump to the OPT fund. Our OPT is, it's our enterprise fund, it's our Oneonta Public Transit for the viewers. And this will be a rather short presentation. So as the slide will show you, I want to show you the 2021 budget versus the 2022 preliminary budget. And also on your page 1 of the OPT, you will see that I also provided you that 19 and 20 actuals. But you will see the fare box and our STOA. These are our major revenue sources. Fare box is not only what people put in the fare boxes as they enter the buses, but it's also our contracts with the colleges and our contract stops and things like that. It's different ways that we collect fare box revenues. Our STOA, which is our state transportation operating aid, is our formula that comes from the Department of DOT. And our 5311 operating aid, that is our federal portion. And all other categories is like advertising and those types of revenues. So you will see that we've only increased the revenues from 2021 to 2022 by 48,000. And net, the reason being is because of the 5311 operating aid. If you remember my presentation on OPT fund last year, and also probably updates throughout the year, is we had a huge surplus in our enterprise fund. And we also were awarded like 1.1 million of CARES to help the transit fund continue providing bus services. We to date have not yet needed to dip into the CARES money. We will probably be dipping into it soon, depending on how much STOA revenue finishes out during the year. So the 477,000 that is projected for the 2022 is going to be coming from the CARES grant. If we end up not having to use the CARES grant funds, I'm going to be asking DOT if we can use it towards capital, which in my back of my brain means that I would like it to go to the transit hub. They have not given us the okay for that yet, but I do know that it's in discussion, that any leftover CARES Act, instead of going for operating, maybe get permission to go for capital. But right now, looking at the 2022 budget, we're going to use 477,000 from the CARES. Which brings me to the next topic that I would like to talk about. And so if you flip to page 2 of your presentation, well, first, page 2 of the presentation are the expenses. Oh, I'm so sorry, the years are not there on the top of the page. So we've broken it out for you between personnel, retirement, depreciation, and other. Enterprise fund is more like a business than it is our general fund. General fund is an operating fund. Enterprise fund is reported more like a business. So you're going to see revenues and expenses that we do not budget for. The reason being is depreciation on equipment is not something that we budget for except for only our local portion. Because when we get state and federal aid for our major capital purchases, such as our buses, that aid needs to run through what we call our P&L, our profit and loss. even though it does not affect our operating budget. And so the depreciation also has to throw through the P&L. Those are called ineligible expenses and revenues for our STOA calculation. So that's why you'll see over in the budget column that I do not have any state or federal depreciation outside of our local portion of depreciation budgeted. So this budget is just a little bit different than what you normally see with our general water and sewer. And
Jenny,
yes,
for a minute.
sure.
If I heard you correctly, you said on the 5311 line, the entire 477,000 is coming out of CARES.
It'd be CARES, yes.
Why is there 5311 funding this year?
Because we got the CARES funding, they are not allocating the 5311.
So there's no 5311.
Correct, as of
planned for next year.
not, right, you will not be eligible for 5311
Okay.
until you draw down your CARES.
Okay, I didn't know.
Now, I did talk to our DOT rep
So it's
today.
really not any, it's not really any bonus.
So, well, what it is if we were to draw down all of our CARES, then we could go to the 5311, but we have to draw the CARES down first. We just happen to be, just like our operating funds or our general fund, we're in a very good financial shape in our transit. So, and because it is so strong, we haven't actually had to even draw down our 5311 operating need for I want to say for the past 3-4 years. So, you know, we didn't even touch what they had prepaid us until 2020 because of COVID. But going forward with that, as you know, because of our surplus, we got DOT's approval to do a pilot program, basically to use up our surplus and also to see by raising the part-time bus drivers' hourly rate, if it would help us recruit bus drivers and help us retain bus drivers. So when we carry those numbers forward, and what I'm thinking about right now is 2023, when the CARES money is no longer there and our 5311 kicks in, we still need to raise revenues to fund all of those raised salaries. And in the past number of years, because we've had such a strong surplus, we have not raised farebox, we have not raised our bus service contracts, because we could not in good conscience justify an increase in those contracts if we were sitting on such a big surplus. But now that that is eventually going to be eaten up and used to fund our operating expenses, we have to look forward. So you will see on page 3 of your presentation what our current fares are for the bus fare box. And David has done some comparisons between Ithaca, we keep going back to Ithaca because they're very similar to us, and also compared to Albany. And what we would like to do is to propose rate increases for 2022 to what we have on the schedule. Just by doing that, it will raise almost, I want to say, hold on a second, I didn't bring that particular calculation with me, but just give me 1 second. Sorry. It will raise 35,000 in additional fare box revenue. And then if we raise it another quarter the next year, then it will be another 20% on top of that. So what we're doing is looking towards the future when the CARES funds are used up and we now just have to rely on 5311. In talking with our DOT rep today, I asked her, I said, this is a statewide problem, really a nationwide problem of recruiting bus drivers and retaining bus drivers. I've asked her if the state STOA formula is going to be adjusted because we will need funding to pay these higher wages. She actually said to me on the phone, well, that's a really good question. And she said, because I bet you the other transit operators are asking the same thing. So she said she was going to take it up, that question up to the people above her, and she would get back to me on it. I also asked her if the formula for the 5311 was also going to be adjusted, or if it was always maxed out at 135. She's also going to confirm that for me. So as that information comes in, I will be, sharing it with you. So we would like you to consider raising the fares to the prices that we have. This is comparable to Ithaca and it's comparable to Albany, and it's basically only a quarter more per ride. We also want to eliminate 3 of them. You'll see on the schedule down at the bottom, the special event fare, that is not active. And I also don't think it is appropriate, correct, David?
It's no longer, we're no longer able to do that.
Yes. The administrative fees for fares billed to third party, again, that is something that that should come off. And transports billed to third parties is also something that should come off. We have DOT regulations. DOT has to approve these, and those 3 items are not on their list. So again, the action plan, thinking to 2023, when our CARES funding is no longer there, what we would like to do for revenue sources is what I just showed you, is raising the fare box fees. We also want to raise bus service contracts. David and I and Joe met this week, and we looked at, and Greg, were you at that meeting? No, I haven't shared all this with Greg yet, but we're looking at the different contracts are coming up for renewal. And I have said to you before that I like slow and steady approaches. So it's a compound effect over a number of years. We do have one contract that we're going to be looking at for a pretty substantial increase because it is just ridiculously low. But once David has negotiated with the different parties and figuring out, what is going to be acceptable on their ends, we'll bring them back to you. But again, we're looking at, a multi-year contract where it's just raised, but it will compound for us. We're also looking at increasing our advertising on the buses. We used to do about $60,000 a year on advertising. That activity has gone way down when we purchased the new Gillett buses. And David is going to be working with staff to reach out to people to see if we can recruit some of that advertising back. As I just said to you, I want to research with the DOT, the formula for our STOA and also the formula for our 5311 operating aid. And we also want to research current and possible expanded shared services with the county. When we have our talks with the county, they have requested more than once for us to take over other routes and or to maintain their buses for them. But this would be a huge undertaking for the city, and we would have to study how the operations would actually be affected by it. So this would not be a quick decision. It would take a lot of study and thought and negotiations between the 2 municipalities to see if it's even workable and also acceptable by everybody who's in power. So this is our action plan that we want to work on in 2022 to be prepared for 2023. So an enterprise fund is much shorter to discuss than the general fund. Yes,
I think one of the bus operations, you or David, what are we trending in 2021? Budgeted 142,750 in the fourth quarter.
for the SUNY contract,
Correct.
that will be at the full amount. No, we gave them a break in the spring, correct? We gave them, yes, we gave them they did not pay for the spring of 2021.
It was paid for by CARES.
So but the CARES funding will cover those lost revenues. So the SUNY contract started in the fall of 2021.
There was relatively no ridership in the spring.
Jenny, David, I've got a question about the advertising. The increase you're looking at, are you planning on doing exterior signage on the buses again?
Yeah, we're looking into it. The big problem and the reason we got away from it is because of the new buses and the damage that it does cause from the wraps. I guess there's new technology out there, we're gonna try it out. It's not supposed to damage them as badly when they're being removed. So we're hoping that it's gonna be better.
Good, yeah, it seemed like a loss of revenue, so that's good.
That's why we kind of stayed, like I said, that's why we stayed away from it with the new buses.
And then just to more fully answer your question, that 142.5 will be fully met because that's the fall semester for SUNY.
Sorry, say that one more time?
The 142.7,
142.5.
the 140, with our 142.750, that will be fully met in 2021 because that's for the fall semester of SUNY.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
getting. Want to know if we're gonna meet that one.
We will.
Yes.
And also David gave a report, and I think Greg shared it in one of the council meetings, that the ridership of SUNY is really doing very well.
It is.
Very well.
How did the trial go with raising the monies for the part-timers? Did that help in the recruitment? Not really help? It's helped us retain. If you look at what's happening nationally, or even around this area, I hate to say it, but they're job hopping, this one's raising their fee, so they go there and they come here all over. We're kind of at that plateau now where we're comparable to the competition, so we're at least maintaining our staff. Of course, probably be nice to have more, but always could use more staff. But I think we put four part-timers on since then, so I could use 4 more.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for staying, David.
Sneaking me in. Don't have too much fun tomorrow. Yeah. Conferences are very fun.
Okay, we'll move back to the water fund. Great. All right, so on the first page of the presentation, I also think the first slide is the 2021 revenue projections. And you will see that our estimates are that we're going to have a surplus in revenues of about 142,000 as compared to the adopted budget. The metered water sales is about 44,000, and the colleges are going to come in, I think, pretty close to what we budgeted. Yes.
So this might be a silly question. Would you recommend with that surplus going back into the reserve?
No, I will get to. Yes, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
to jump ahead.
Yes. To answer your question quickly, I just wanted to go into fund balance.
Sure.
And as we've talked about all year long, the water fund balance is very weak. So I will not be asking for anything to be transferred to the reserves.
Okay.
Okay, and then the next page is the expenditure projections. And again, it looks like we are going to be realizing a savings of about 151,000 in the water. Now, remember, all of these numbers are subject to change depending on if something happens between now and December that I was not anticipating in my estimates. The major expenditure savings, and you will see this listed on your handout, is the majority of it is in payroll and fringe benefits and some equipment purchases that either are not going to happen or came in under the estimated budget. Now, what's good about this is that in the 2021 budget, we had projected that we were going to use about 144,000 of the fund balance for 2021. And as you know, the Catella well happened. And that repair estimate is about 370,000. When the council decided on how to fund that, it was an advance from the general fund. So even though it's a loan from the general fund, because we are expecting the water fund to pay the general fund back, what it does to the water fund's financial statements is that we have an expenditure for the 370,000 because they got the cash from the general fund, but then that gets transferred over to the capital project fund. What that does is that hits an expenditure in the water fund without a revenue source. So that will affect the unrestricted fund balance temporarily until either one, we raise it in metered water sales, or we find a grant, or the council approves to bond it. Unfortunately, I shouldn't say that. We can no longer bond it. You have to do that before the project starts. So until we find either those two revenue sources, the unrestricted fund balance of the water fund is going to be depleted quite a bit because I'm not able to record a revenue within the water fund because it's a loan from the general fund. It's not a contribution from the general fund. So to summarize that up, when you look at page 3 of your handout and also at the screen, you will see that our restricted fund balances are estimated to close out around 496,000, and our unrestricted at 212. Had that 370,000 been funded through a revenue source, that number would be 582,000. And so I just want to make that very clear. That's why I show you two different schedules on page 3. So also, if you move over to page 4, I did the same thing as I did for the general fund, and I show you the detail of the restricted reserves. We have an employee benefit reserve in the water fund, and then we also have the water equipment. And I show you what we have committed to spending and our outstanding encumbrances, and what I have suggested that we fund through the 2022 budget for a replacement of the truck for the water plant. Yes. So yes. So you will see, I did the same analysis here as we did for the general fund. So the 2022 preliminary budget is 2.7. And if we were to hit 30 or 40 or 45%, you will see how far under the water fund is by hitting those for the unrestricted fund balance. This just supports the fact that we need to raise our water rates.
And that's on page 3 of the handouts.
Yeah. Page 4 of the handout shows and also, or I'm sorry, page 5 of the handouts shows the change from the type of service area within the water fund. And it also shows for the expenditures 21 to 22. The expenditures are off by 117,000. And then when you look at the revenues, I'm requesting a 10% increase in total revenues that will be raised between metered water sales. We will be doing a Waterworth presentation on November 9th with suggested ideas of how to structure the rates. And so our anticipated revenue increase is about 137. I believe these are conservative. The reason I believe these revenues are conservative is because one, we're going to hopefully have more people in the Main Street area once the deeds Lofts project is done, once the Springbrook project is done. That's going to increase our water and sewer sales. And you'll also see in our ideas for expanding, like we talked about our 2022 action plan, if we are able to expand water services to the town areas out in the west end or out in the east end, again, you know, with a private-public partnership in expanding the water lines, that could be a potential increase in water and sewer services. Well, not sewer, but water services. We're not talking sewer lines out there, correct, Fred? Maybe on one side, okay. So, but these are all preliminary. So what I'm saying is that I think the revenue estimates are very conservative, depending on how much our customer base increases. On page 6 of your handout, again, it's the same presentation. It shows you where the expenditures change, what type of expenditure changed by the 117,000, and also by where the funding changed. And then page 7 of the presentation, I did the same thing that I did with the general fund. I went back to 2015. And I showed you the expenditures for the budget and the revenues for the budget, and how it changed from year to year. You will see that the meters, the water meter sales budget, between 2015 and 2022 went up 700,000 for the water meter sales, but for the colleges, it has only gone up about 15,000. The reason for that is the colleges stayed pretty consistent, except this year's budget, I still did not want to bring it up to the full amount, not knowing what COVID may do for the spring semester. So again, I think these numbers are conservative, because if for some reason, whatever COVID may do by the spring, I just did not want to overstate the revenues for that particular area.
Jenny, can we go back to the expenditures on page 6? What was the reason for the $30,000 increase on line 463 professional services?
I believe is, we don't normally budget a whole lot of professional services. We have $35,000 exactly for preliminary engineering, future project, or actually a series of projects. Basically, advanced design to the point where we get a better cost estimate, some preliminary design plans, and we're ready to apply for funding. That would be for a west end tank replacement and a couple of transmission lines. It's not a normal every year operating expense that we're going to do this year, not every.
I understand the reason why we're outsourcing, but there's just no way we can do that.
No. What is that? That's what we get in the pipe.
Also, the $84,000 increase in personal services, the bulk of that is because we reallocated the Director of Public Works and the Deputy Director of Public Works, because now that they're overseeing general water and sewer, we reallocated their salaries between the funds. Any questions? As I said, on November 9th, we're planning a Waterworth presentation to show you how the rates will move the revenues along. And remember the presentation from last year? It's going to take probably 5 to 7 years of rate increases before we get them to the level that they need to be. And we will also be putting in there our possible future debt. That will be financing for the different projects that we know about. We're able to put in there, say we want to borrow $3 million. We can just say $3 million, plug it in at 2%, start it on this year, and then the graphs will just adjust themselves. The software is just amazing. And so we'll be having a presentation for you on the 9th.
Well, that presentation also included information on alternative pay schedules.
We're going to, our goal is to raise 10% more in revenue. We are going to hopefully by then be able to say to you, we would like to have a base charge of this and so much per gallon for this and the ascending rate of the gallons. Now, I understand that there's some confusion among some people about how much a resident is charged per gallon versus how much, say, the colleges are charged per gallon. Even though the rate table shows that it's thousands on the cent. Last year I did a math calculation and I sent it out to all the council members to show them exactly what is being charged to the highway user. If the resident was to pay for 3 million gallons of water versus a high user, that is basically 42% more than what the resident is being charged for. The reason it looks small on the table is because it compounds as it goes through the table. And it's just how math works. And so, I tried to explain that very thoroughly in that email. I did high level and I also did very detailed for those of you who wanted to look at the math. So what we're going to be doing is looking at, is it more feasible to charge base versus a minimum versus so much per gallon? Is it smarter to do just half a penny per gallon for everybody and then charge based on their meter size? So we want to look at all of that. We also want to explore the possibility of quarterly billing. Now, I do not know if we can get it implemented for 2022, but what it would do currently, until we can get the program that we're looking at that could do it for us electronically, is that it would be more postage and more paper and more collection. And, we probably have to have part-time staff or help us with the collection because it's such a high volume. Because, we did implement online billing, which has become more and more popular. And what's really cool about this online billing online payment is the computers talk to each other. So all we have to do is upload the payments and it's automatically posted. Our staff doesn't need to do anything but upload. It creates the receipt, it puts it right on the water account, and it just works beautifully. And versus an ACH collection, if it went through our bank through ACH, then we would have to manually do everything. Our computers would not be able to talk to each other. So the way and people are realizing that $1.50 for an e-check is almost the cost of what it costs them to mail it to us, because they have to pay for the stamp, they have to pay for their check, they have to pay for their envelope, they have to go to the post office. So they realize the convenience of the $1.50 e-check is really worth their time and effort. We're hoping that that gets more popular. And eventually our goal is, it's not going to happen soon, but eventually our goal is to mail paper bills to people who still want paper, but email bills to people who want email bills. And also, I just want to stress to you that for the past couple of years, we have already offered prepayment plans for anybody who wants to send us money on a monthly basis, and we'll just put it right on their account. Nobody has taken us up on that. We also have offered payment plans for people that needed payment plans, and also because of the moratorium of New York State, we had to not charge penalty on those payment plans. We have, I want to say, probably 50 households who are on payment plans. Also, anybody who's currently on a payment plan now will not get re-levied if their account is not paid in full by October 31st. Anybody who has not contacted us for a payment plan, their unpaid water and sewer bill will get re-levied. If they're a city resident, we cannot re-levy town accounts. We also have accept partial payments for people, even if they don't want to be on a current payment plan, they just want to send us $100. We have done that. So we have really tried to modify and make the whole process much more residential friendly and convenient for people. So we'll be looking at even making better and more improvements as time goes on.
Is that information on our website?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there, a matter of fact, with the billing, I'm pretty sure that letter that I sent out, because one thing with the moratorium, which has increased costs for us, but unfortunately, I was mandated to do it. With the moratorium, I had to send out the moratorium regulations with every billing. And in doing so, I didn't want to overwhelm the homeowner, so I actually wrote a narrative letter to explain their payment options and to explain that they could have a payment plan or prepayments if they wanted and things like that. So that went out with every billing, which meant that we had to hand stuff every envelope. But anytime we send out a billing, and it doesn't matter if it's the first time or it's the 10th time, we have to include that notice from New York State. Until that moratorium is lifted. As of right now, it's supposed to be done by December 22nd, but I do not know if it'll get extended again.
Is there any way of including that information with the water and sewer bill, that they have those payment options?
Yes, I did. I put it right in the letter.
It is.
Yes, I gave it right in the letter that they can set up payment plans, they can set up.
And no one took us up on it?
prepayments. Pardon?
But nobody took us up on it?
Not on the prepayments. They did on payment plans, but not on the prepayments.
I don't know if that prepayment piece was in
The prepayment? I'd have to confirm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the prepayment piece was in the letter because it was focused on the moratorium issues.
Yeah, I'll confirm it, Lynn. No, well.
I can't remember.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
just
pretty
not-
sure I put it in
Did you?
there.
Okay.
So I said, for those of you who want to, but I'll confirm it.
So Jenny, excuse me, but the, so you've got about 50 people on the payment plan. Do we know how it is that they came to decide to do that? It was because.
It was from the letter.
It was because of the letter.
It was because of the letter.
That's very good information.
Any other questions? Okay, if you are good with the presentation, again, we will present the tentative budget with the current revenue estimates that we have. Also, just so you know, the current budget projects that we'll use about, I believe it's about 80,000 fund balance. $80,026 of fund balance.
Jenny, can I ask just one more question? Do we have a sense of what the average household is paying for their water?
Well, off the top of my head, from analyzing the last annual billing that we did, we had over 18, we sent out about just under 4,000 annual bills. Over 1,800 of them were at the minimum, meaning that they used less than 37,000 gallons. The next set of parameters, I want to say there was about 300 to 400 on the next level, which meant that they only went up maybe $75 more than the minimum. But I have all those stats, but I don't have them with me.
Okay.
So, but I
Yeah,
can,
I'd love
can-
this. I'd love
yeah,
to see
I
that.
can give them out to you.
Sure.
Well, also 2020 annual billing was a little skewed because of COVID and the shutdown. So you would see the hotels and the restaurants' water bills going down, but you would see the residents' usage going up because they were at home. And we did have some people a little surprised, especially if they had a number of children at home going, wait a minute, my water bill was like, yeah, it's because you were home all the time. You know, you were using your own water instead of using another facility's water. So, but what I found, Diana, but I have a lot of fun with numbers, is that the annual usage between 19 and 20 was almost the same number. It was just redistributed. Any other questions? Sewer fund is just even going to be more easy because their fund balance is pretty strong. So again, we have the revenue projections for 2021, and you will see that the estimate is about 63,000 more than the anticipated budget. The sewer rents, I don't think we're going to quite hit 3.1,350,000. I think it's going to come in more around 1,340,000. But we also have I believe we're going to make more revenue from our town contract with our sewer rents than originally anticipated. So that's why we have a surplus of about 63,000. Again, these numbers are conservative, but I like to keep them conservative. For the expenditures, we're also going to see a savings in our anticipated sewer budget. And I think we're going to save about $133,000 worth of expenditures. Again, 34,000 of it is in payroll and fringe benefits. We have about 34,000 in vehicle maintenance, about 15,000 in utilities, and about 11,000 in non-active retired health insurance. So that's the majority of the expense savings there. And taking these projections and applying them, oh, I'm sorry. This will show you the categories of where the savings are. Oh, yeah, I just went over that. Can you go to the next one, please? Okay, so taking the projections of the revenues and expenditures and applying them to the fund balances, you will see that the restricted fund balance is estimated to close out at 460,000. And the unrestricted is estimated to close out by around 954,000, or a total fund balance of 1.4. And when you apply this to our 35% rule, you will see that we are strong with 35% and 40% within the sewer fund. But again, I am not going to recommend that we transfer any to our restricted reserves at this point in time. And again, what I would like to suggest strongly, and I'll repeat it a number of times, is when we look at the ARPA funds for 2022 to use it towards water and sewer projects. Because this budget for both water and sewer does not have any contributions to any capital projects. Okay, page 4 of your handout. This is again just a detailed report on the reserves between the employee benefits and the sewer equipment. And you will see that we have not committed anything in the preliminary budget to be used from the reserves. Page 5 of the presentation.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Just out of order, sorry.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Page 5 of the presentations, you will see that we compared the expenditures between 21 and 22, and it's almost the same number. It's just a difference of $3,900. And with the revenues, we're estimating again a 10% increase in what I think the projected revenues will be, and that's about $157,000 increase. Page 6 will show you the summary of expenditures by the type of expenditure. And it will also show you that the amount that we want to appropriate from fund balance for the sewer fund is a little over $48,000. Personally, I don't think we're actually going to use that in 2022, but again, I want to keep the numbers conservative and I don't want to overestimate our revenues. The 2021 adopted budget had anticipated we were going to use 209,000 of our reserves, which we will not. And as I did with the general and sewer fund, or water fund for the sewer fund, I also went back to 2015. I showed you the difference of the budgeted expenditures, the change in expenditures and in revenues and reserves. And I also showed you the actual sewer rents and the sewer rents from the college, the colleges. And this is one point that I stressed last year. You will see that from 2016 to 2019, the sewer rents did not change in the budget. That is one thing that I would like to stress. At the time, as I said, the decisions were made upon the information that they had at the time. And I'm sure that they were the right decisions at that time. But going forward, I strongly believe in slow and steady increases so that they compound and stay equivalent to expenses. I do not like to see revenue stagnate. And I do not like to see rates not move, because your expenses are eventually going to catch up. We have a lot of infrastructure that we need to repair. You know, we have a lot of capital projects that need to be done. So that is why I would like to, once again, just stress slow and steady. And we are well into the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. It's a $9 million project. You will see that I have budgeted for the first debt payment, which will be due in October of 2022. That is in this budget, and that will be for the short-term financing. We will eventually go to long-term financing for that, and then that will move into our debt service schedule.
Just to recap, we're looking at general fund at 2%, water at 10%, sewer.
Yeah, and I am also going to ask you to raise the ambulance rates and also the fare boxes on the PT. We will also, I've asked the department heads to look at their fees that they charge. We haven't gotten any recommendations back, but that was one of Greg's action plan items for 2022, was to meet and discuss in detail with each department head to analyze the cost of what they're providing versus the fees of what we're charging, to make sure that we're at least breaking even, to make sure that we're covering things properly. But I want to, if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank you for this long meeting and your attention and your respect in listening to everything that we have to say. I greatly appreciate it. And I know it's a difficult budget year. It's compounded from the reactions of COVID with the rising costs and the slow revenue growth. But I truly believe in my heart that we have a good team and that we have great action plans designed, and that, you know, we will make it work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.